The rope around Nathan Prescott's wrists bit deep enough to leave marks that would last a week, and the orc walking behind him with a spear haft had already driven it into the small of his back 3 times, just to watch him stumble. The sun was a white-hot brand overhead, baking the volcanic plains until the air shimmered, and every breath tasted of sulfur and dust, and Nathan kept his eyes on the ground not out of submission, but because he was studying the terrain, counting his steps, measuring the distance to the ridgeline where he might have one chance at running. He had been a prisoner for 4 days. 4 days since the patrol of Greystone clan warriors had swept down on the fishing village of Tallow Cove, while half the men were still out on the water, and he had been the unlucky one standing on the dock repairing his nets when they came. They had not come to raid. They had come to collect. Apparently some merchant from the sunken coast had borrowed heavily from Greystone clan and then fled, and the clan's warchief had decided that a ransom demand delivered on the back of a human prisoner would carry more weight than a written letter. Nathan Prescott was not the merchant. He was not even remotely connected to the merchant. He was simply the man who had been standing there, weathered by salt and storms, with the bad fortune of being the only able-bodied human male on the dock at the wrong hour of the wrong morning. Now he walked with 6 orc warriors through country that was increasingly theirs, the flat plains giving way to a volcanic valley where steam vented from cracks in the pale stone ground, and clusters of hot spring pools steamed in the shade of dark basalt ridges. He had heard of this place. Every sailor on the sunken coast had. The Caldermere Valley, the orcs called it Voruk's throat, the throat of the earth. A low fantasy dream of a place, where a sprawling hot spring town had grown up over generations at the valley's heart, a town called Ashpool where orcs and a handful of human traders and outcasts lived in the steam-damp shadow of the volcano the orcs called the Sleeping Mother. Nathan did not want to go to Ashpool. Ashpool meant going deeper into orc territory, farther from the coast, farther from any chance of being recognized or ransomed by someone who actually cared whether he came home. His boat, the Saltern, was probably sitting at its mooring growing barnacles. His crew of 2 old dace and the boy Wickham had almost certainly scattered the moment the orc patrol arrived. He could not blame them. The spear haft hit him between the shoulder blades again, and Nathan breathed through his teeth. "Keep moving, soft skin," said the orc behind him, a broad warrior named Vok whose tusks were ringed with copper and whose patience for prisoners appeared to be nearly exhausted. Nathan kept moving. He was 32 years old, medium height, corded with the lean muscle of a man who had hauled nets and lines since he was old enough to walk without falling overboard. His hair was the brown of dried kelp, his skin salted to a permanent bronze, his eyes a gray-green like deep water. He was not a soldier. He was not a hero. He was a fisherman from a mid-sized coastal village who was going to survive this because there was no other acceptable outcome. That was when he first saw her. She came from the east, moving fast along the ridge above the patrol's path, a lean figure dropping down the basalt slope with the casual sureness of someone who had memorized every foothold. She dropped the last 10 feet and landed in a crouch that sent a small plume of pale volcanic dust rolling outward, and she straightened and turned to face the patrol with her hands loose at her sides, which Nathan would later understand was the orc equivalent of coming in peace, but being entirely ready not to be. She was tall, as all orcs were, broad-shouldered but built with a lithe power that the warriors surrounding Nathan lacked. Their bulk was force. Hers was speed and precision compressed into a frame that moved like something that had never once in its life questioned its right to take up space. Her skin was a deep olive green, the color of sea glass in shadow, and her hair was black and heavy, pulled back from her face with a cord of braided leather and spilling loose down her back. Her tusks were modest, slightly upswept, and her face had sharp planes, a strong jaw, dark eyes set wide and deep, a nose that had been broken once and healed clean, a mouth that was, at this moment, pressed into a flat, assessing line. She wore fitted warrior's scout leathers the color of ash and charcoal. A close-cut bodice of dark leather laced tight at the front over a sleeveless undershirt the color of pale smoke. High-waisted breeches of the same dark leather belted with a wide strap of banded iron links, and knee-high boots strapped at the calf. A short blade rode at her left hip and a longer scout's knife rode at her right, and she carried a recurved bow unstrung across her back with a quiver of fletched bolts at her shoulder. The outfit was practical, unmistakably hers, and it fit her with the ease of a second skin. "Vok," she said, and her voice carried a weight that stopped the whole patrol cold. "Warchief Drakul sent me out ahead to find you. You are 2 days late." "We acquired a complication," Vok said, and jerked his chin at Nathan. The orc woman's dark eyes moved to Nathan, traveled up and down once, and returned to Vok with a flatness that conveyed precisely nothing about what she thought of what she was seeing. "Is the complication alive and uninjured?" she asked. "Alive," Vok said. "Uninjured," she repeated with a very precise emphasis on the word, and her gaze moved to the spear haft in Vok's hand and then back to his face. A silence stretched. Vok shrugged. "He walks." "He walks," she said, and the quality in her voice was something that made even Vok's jaw tighten. "Walk up here, human." Nathan did not move immediately, partly because he did not entirely trust what moving toward an unknown orc scout might accomplish, and partly because his wrists were still bound and he was calculating. But her eyes were on him, and they were steady and entirely without the particular anticipatory gleam that Vox had when he swung the spear haft, so he walked forward. She looked at the rope on his wrists, then at Vox. "Cut it," she said. "He is a prisoner of the war chiefs. He is a ransom package," she said. "You deliver a ransom package with rope burns that the war chief's letter claims were inflicted against his orders. And you explain to Drakul why the human merchant whose debt we are collecting is suddenly sympathetic, and the ransom smells of torture rather than lawful clan business." She let that sit for a breath and then added with a coolness that was somehow more effective than anger, "Cut it, Vok." The rope was cut. Nathan kept his face neutral and rolled his wrists slowly, feeling the blood return in a hot flood of pins and needles. "I am Gromma Earthshaker," the orc woman said, looking at him directly. "I am the war chief's forward scout. You are going to Ashpool. No one will touch you again if you walk cooperatively. You have my word." Nathan studied her face for a long moment. It was a face that, he thought, did not offer its word carelessly. "Nathan Prescott," he said. "Fisherman, wrong place, wrong time." Something moved in her expression, something brief and difficult to name. "Often how it works," she said, and then she turned and set the pace north toward the valley, and the patrol fell in behind her, and Nathan walked in the middle of them, and Gromma Earthshaker drifted back through the group with the unhurried ease of water finding its level until she was walking beside and slightly behind him, between him and Vok and his spear haft, and she stayed there. Nathan noticed. He noticed very carefully, and he said nothing, and he walked. The Caldermere Valley opened up around them over the next 3 hours of walking, the plain tilting downward into a wide bowl of pale and rust-colored stone, where the hot springs steamed from the ground in dozens of vents and pools, the water ranging from clear blue to milky white to a mineral orange yellow at the edges. The smell of sulfur was strong but not overwhelming, overlaid with something warmer and stranger, a mineral sweetness that Nathan had no word for. Ashpool sat at the valley's heart, built on a natural shelf of flat basalt above the flood line of the springs, and it was larger than he had imagined. There were stone buildings here, not the hide tents and longhouses he had pictured from sailor stories. The buildings were low and broad, built from the black and rust-red basalt of the valley, with flat roofs weighted by stones and open archways that let the breeze carry the steam through. A market ran down the main street, stalls covered with canvas stretched between iron poles, and the population was perhaps 300 orcs, and, to his genuine surprise, perhaps 40 or 50 humans, traders, he guessed, or people with no better options, or people who had made their lives here by some calculus he did not yet understand. There were also, he noted with the careful attention of a man cataloging his options: 3 stables, 2 smithies, a long building that smelled of cooked meat and fermented grain and was obviously a tavern, and a larger building at the valley's north end, set apart, with the clan banner of Greystone hanging above the door. That would be the warchief's hall. They were not taken there immediately. Gromma Earthshaker peeled the patrol off with crisp instructions and led only Nathan, to a low building off the main market street that turned out to be a kind of receiving house, a place for clan business to be housed and managed, with a stone bench and a fire pit and a sleeping pallet that was straw but clean. "You will stay here," she said. "The warchief will see you in the morning. You will be brought food and water." "And if I walk out that door?" Nathan asked, not as a challenge, as information gathering. She leaned against the door frame and looked at him. "The valley has 1 exit to the south and 1 to the north. Both are guarded. The southern pass takes 2 days to walk and is active with patrol. The northern pass crosses volcanic terrain that has killed experienced scouts." She paused. "You would not make it." "That is not a no," he said. "No," she said, "it is not." And then, with the quietest possible thread of something that was almost humor running under the words, "It is a recommendation." He sat on the stone bench and watched her. "You stepped between me and the one with the spear," he said. "The whole march. You kept positioning between us." Her expression did not change, but something in her stillness did. "He had already hit you 3 times. A bruised prisoner is a liability." "That is the practical answer," Nathan said. "Is it the only one?" She looked at him for a moment, and then she looked away, out through the door to the steam-hazed market street. "Get some rest, fisherman," she said. "Tomorrow is not going to be simple." She left. He heard no lock, no bar. He sat in the warm, sulphurous air and thought about what she had said, and what she had not said, and eventually he lay down on the straw pallet and slept better than he had in 4 days, which told him something about his own judgment that he was not entirely sure how to process. Morning came white and hot. The sun filtered through volcanic haze to a diffuse glow that lit the steam from the springs below and made the whole valley look like something out of a half-remembered dream. Nathan was awake before it was fully light, sitting on the bench with his back against the warm stone wall, when Gromma Earthshaker returned carrying a clay pot of hot water and a flat bread that smelled of grain and ash, and a strip of dried fish that made him want to laugh out of pure, bewildered recognition. "Fish," he said. "Caught in the spring pools," she said. "They are different from your sea fish, smaller, blander." "I know every blander fish on 3 coasts," he said, and took it and ate it and drank the hot water, which tasted of minerals but was clean, and she sat across from him on the other bench and watched the door. "You were a fisherman," she said, as though testing the word or what was behind it. "From Tallow Cove." "Born there," he said. "My father fished it, his father fished it. It is a middling coast village with 2 good moorings and 1 bad winter every 3 years. "You are not married," she said, and then said, immediately after, with an absolute flatness that suggested she had surprised herself, "That is in the patrol's report." They noted no family connection to complicate the ransom. "No," he said, not making it strange. "I had a wife. She died 6 years ago, fever, the 2nd winter after we married." He paused. "Since then it has been me and the boat and the 2 men who work it with me." She was quiet for a moment. "I am sorry," she said, and it was not a performance. It was a plain expression of a plain thing. "Thank you," he said, equally plain. He looked at her. "What happens to me today?" "The warchief reads the ransom demand to you. You understand the terms. You are held here in the valley until either the merchant pays or the warchief decides on another approach." She paused. "The second option is bad for you." "What does the second option look like?" "He sells the debt to the Salt Road trading houses," she said. "They are more creative about collection, and they are not bound by the clan's word about treatment of prisoners." Nathan absorbed this with the steadiness of a man who had navigated squalls by calculating what could and could not be controlled. "What does the merchant owe?" 300 gold weights, she said, "borrowed to finance a trading venture. He took the cargo and fled south. The venture returned a profit and he kept it." Nathan thought about that. 300 gold weights was roughly what the Saltern was worth, his entire livelihood. The accumulated work of 12 years on the water. And if someone else pays it, he asked. The ransom, not the merchant's debt. Does the war chief release the prisoner? That is what a ransom is, she said, with a slant that might have been dry humor or impatience or something between them. I do not have 300 gold weights, he said. I know, she said. The war chief's hall was cool inside despite the heat of the valley, the walls thick enough to hold the night's chill well into the afternoon. Drakhul was exactly what Nathan had expected from a clan war chief. Enormous, scarred, gray-tusked, with the kind of absolute authority that does not need to raise its voice because everything in the room already knows the room belongs to it. He was also, Nathan noted with careful interest, businesslike. This was not a man who enjoyed cruelty. This was a man who was owed money and had found a lever. The terms were read by a human clerk, which Nathan had not expected. A thin, scarred man in his 50s who read in a flat merchant coast accent and met Nathan's eyes without any expression at all. The merchant, one Henley Das of Kervakt, owed the Greystone clan 300 gold weights plus the accumulated interest of 8 months, which brought the sum to 344. Nathan was held as surety. The merchant had 60 days to pay. If he did not, Nathan would be sold to the Salt Road houses as a contracted laborer, which was a legal fiction that everyone in the room understood was essentially debt slavery with paperwork. Nathan stood very still and said nothing, because there was nothing to say yet. Gromma Earthshaker stood at the edge of the room, near the door, in her position as forward scout, and Nathan was aware of her stillness in the same way he was aware of a lighthouse through fog, not looking directly at it, but knowing exactly where it was at all times. That evening, after the formal reading, Gromma brought him back to the receiving house and sat with him longer than she had to. The light through the open door was the long amber of late afternoon, and the steam from the springs caught it and made the whole valley look as though it were on a slow, comfortable fire. "Tell me about the coast," she said, and it came out careful, like something she had been deciding whether to say. Nathan told her. He told her about the Saltern, about the particular feeling of being far enough from shore that the land disappeared, and it was only water in every direction, about the way the fish ran in the cold months versus the warm months, about the phosphorescent water in late summer when the sea itself seemed to light from within. He told her about Tallow Cove's market day, about the way the salt dried on everything including your skin until you tasted the sea when you licked your lips. He told her about storms, about the particular mathematics of a squall, when to run and when to ride it out, and about the fact that a good fisherman was primarily a person who had survived their bad decisions long enough to learn not to make them again. She listened without interrupting, and he watched her face in the long light, and she was not simply being polite. She was genuinely there, genuinely following every word, and there was something in her expression that he could not name yet but that made him feel that he was being heard in a way that he had mostly stopped expecting. "You love it," she said when he paused. "The sea," he thought about it. "Yes, I do. I love it the way you love something that has been trying to kill you for 30 years and has not quite managed it yet." She made a sound that was almost a laugh. It happened quickly and she seemed to notice it and contain it, but it was there, and Nathan filed it away in the part of his mind where he kept important things. "And you?" he asked. "The valley." She looked out the door at the steam rising from the ground in the low light of the day's end. "I have been a scout for 8 years, she said. "I grew up in the valley, but scouting means I am mostly outside it, on the ridges, moving, watching." She paused. "I prefer the ridges." "Why?" She considered him for a moment as though deciding how much of an answer the question deserved. "On the ridges, things are clear," she said. "What you see is what exists. There is no politics on a ridge, no negotiation, no clan business." She paused again. "No ransom packages that should not exist." Nathan held her gaze. "Is that what I am? Something that should not exist?" "You should not be here," she said, not unkindly. Dracul is not a cruel man, but he made a cruel decision when he authorized the patrol to take a substitute. The merchant owes the debt, not you. She said it with a directness that carried an edge she was clearly not trying to hide. I have said as much. To the war chief, yes, and he said the pressure of a living prisoner speaks louder than a letter. Her jaw was tight. He is right about the practical effect. I am not arguing that he is wrong about the strategy. I am arguing that the strategy is wrong. Nathan looked at her for a long time. She was not avoiding his eyes. She was looking straight back, unflinching, and there was something in that steadiness that he recognized, the same quality in a person that the sea had, not safe, not gentle, but honest in a way that safer things never quite managed. "Tell me about the war chief's 60 days, he said. "What actually happens?" She laid it out for him with the brisk clarity of someone giving a scout's field report. The merchant Henley Doss had been traced to a town called Portgrave, 4 days south of the valley, by the main road. Dracul had sent a message with the ransom demand the morning of Nathan's arrival. 60 days meant, practically speaking, that the merchant had time to pay if he chose to, and that if he did not, Dracul would likely wait another 30 days past the deadline before moving to the Salt Road option, because the Salt Road houses took a commission, and the war chief preferred not to lose 40 gold weights to a middleman. "So 90 days, Nathan said. "Possibly." "And the merchant will not pay," Nathan said, "because if he was the kind of man who paid his debts, he would not have run in the first place." She looked at him and said nothing, which was its own kind of agreement. "So I need to find 344 gold weights in 90 days, Nathan said, "from inside a volcanic valley in the middle of Orc territory." He said it steadily, not in despair but in the voice of a man beginning to plan. "You could attempt escape," she said, and the way she said it was not an encouragement. It was a completion of the inventory. "You told me the passes were guarded. They are. And the volcanic terrain to the north kills experienced scouts." "It does. Then escape is off the table until those odds improve." He looked at her. "Can I work in the valley? Is there anything here a fisherman is good for?" She blinked. Whatever she had expected him to say, it was not that. "The spring pools are fished, but poorly," she said slowly. "The orcs here do not value fish greatly. The human traders do, and the fresh-caught fish from the pools sell at the market." She paused. "If someone with actual knowledge managed the pool fishery properly, how much would that earn?" In 90 days, given the size of the market, she thought, genuinely calculating. "Perhaps 40 gold weights, perhaps 50 if the run is good." "Then I am approximately 300 gold weights short," Nathan said. "But it is a start." He looked at her. "Will the war chief allow it?" "I will ask him," she said. "Tonight." And then, after a pause that was slightly too long to be purely practical, she added, "He owes me a favor." 2 days later, Nathan Prescott was fishing the hot spring pools of the Caldermere Valley with borrowed nets and a long, flat-bottomed skiff that some long-ago human trader had left in a storage shed, and that no one had claimed in years. The pools were strange to fish, the water warm and sulphurous, the springfish pale and soft-finned and not particularly large, but they were abundant and they were fresh. And fresh fish in a town that mostly survived on dried and preserved meat was something people would pay for. He cleaned and mended the nets in the evenings with the methodical patience of a man who had been doing it since childhood, and he sold at the market every morning, and he kept a tally scratched into a piece of flat shale with a nail. Gromma Earthshaker came back from a scouting run on the 6th day and walked through the market and stopped at his stall, and she looked at the fish laid out on the flat stone in rows, and then she looked at him and she said, "You are already known here." "Word gets around," he said. "The human traders especially. They miss fresh fish more than they expected to." She picked up one of the springfish and turned it over in her hand, examining it with a focused curiosity that he was beginning to recognize as characteristic of her. "It is very different from a sea fish," she said. "Try it cooked," he said. "I traded 2 fish for cooking time at the tavern last night." They are much better with the right treatment. She looked at him. You traded cooking time. I do not have a fire of my own yet, he said. Working on it. She put the fish down. Come with me, she said. Her own quarters in Ashpool were not in the receiving house or the main warrior's longhouse. They were a single small room attached to the scout station at the east end of town, with a stone fire pit and a ventilation shaft in the roof, and a view out a narrow window of the steam vents on the valley floor. It was spare in the way of a person who was rarely in one place long enough to accumulate, but it was clean, and the fire pit was good. She built the fire with the practiced ease of someone who had done it in worse conditions, and Nathan cooked the fish he had brought, gutted and scaled, in the clay pan from her kit, with dried herbs from a small bundle hanging above the pit that smelled of something he did not know but that tasted, when the fish was done, like wild thyme and something mineral and particular to this valley. They ate sitting across the fire pit from each other, and she ate the springfish and did not say it was good with words, but she reached for a second piece, and Nathan watched her and felt something warm that was not the fire. You did not have to take the patrol route between me and Vok, he said after a while. She did not pretend not to understand. She looked at the fire. You were not combative. You were not stupid about it. You were reading terrain the whole time. I could see you doing it, but you were not going to do anything reckless, and you did not deserve to be struck again. She paused. That is all. All right, he said. That is not me feeling anything in particular about you specifically, she said, with a precision that she seemed to apply because she wanted to be honest, or perhaps because she wanted to believe what she was saying. All right, he said again mildly, and she glanced at him sharply as though she had expected him to push. He did not push. He cleaned the pan and set it back in her kit and said good night, and he walked back to the receiving house in the warm, sulphurous dark of the Caldermere Valley, and he thought about the look on her face when she had said that, the slightly too careful emphasis on the word specifically, and he thought he might have started to understand something important about Gromma Earthshaker. The days built into weeks with a rhythm that Nathan organized around the fish market in the mornings, and the nets and the skiff in the afternoons, and the evenings, increasingly, around the scout station fire pit, where he and Gromma ate and talked and stayed longer than either of them found reasons to justify. She was away on scouting runs for days at a stretch, and Nathan noticed her absence in the way he noticed a change in the wind, as a physical fact that rearranged the quality of everything. When she returned, she found him at the market or the fish pools always, and she never announced her arrival, but she appeared at his shoulder, and he always knew she was there before she spoke, the particular quality of her presence registering on whatever sense it was that the sea had taught him to trust when his eyes couldn't reach far enough. In the third week, Vok and 2 other warriors came to the market stall while Gromma was away on patrol, and Vok stood at the stall and smiled with his copper-ring tusks and said something to the other warriors that Nathan did not catch, and then looked at Nathan and said, "The salt fish is bad, human. My friend here got sick from it." Nathan looked at the friend in question, who looked entirely well. He looked at Vok. "The fish was caught this morning," he said. "It does not keep long enough to go bad between the pool and the stall." "He says he is sick," Vok said. "Then he should see the clan healer," Nathan said, and he kept his hands flat on the stall and his voice level and his eyes on Vok's face, which he could see was calculating whether a human fisherman with a debt tally scratched on a shale tile was worth the effort of a real confrontation. "You should pay compensation," Vok said. 2 gold weights." "No," Nathan said. The market had gone quiet around them. A dozen orcs and 3 human traders were watching from various distances with the careful non-involvement of people who did not want to be next. Nathan was aware of all of them and of the specific weight of the moment, and he did not move and he did not look away from Vok. "You are very bold for a ransom package," Vok said. "I am a market vendor with clean fish," Nathan said. "I do not pay compensation for a sick man who is not sick. If you have a true complaint, take it to the war chief." Vok leaned forward. He was, Nathan calculated, about 6 seconds from making a physical problem out of this situation. Gromma Earthshaker said from behind and to the left of Vok. Is there an issue at this stall? She had not been there a moment ago. Nathan did not know when she had come back from patrol or how long she had been watching, but she was there now, standing with her hands loose at her sides in the early morning market light, trail dust still on her boots, and the three warriors turned to look at her. The human's fish made my friend ill, Vok said with less certainty. Your friend looks well, Gromma said. She stepped past the two flanking warriors and came to stand at the stall beside Nathan, and she looked at the fish laid out and picked one up and examined it with a visible deliberateness. The fish is fresh, she said. Caught this morning. I was at the East Pool at dawn and I watched him pull these nets. She set the fish down. You are welcome to take your complaint to the war chief. I will attend that meeting. I would be glad to give an account of what I observed. Vok's jaw was tight enough that the copper tusk rings caught the light. He looked at Nathan and then at Gromma, and then he turned and walked away, and his two companions followed, and the market slowly returned to its noise. Nathan exhaled once quietly. You were at the East Pool at dawn, he asked. I came back early, she said. She was still looking at the space Vok had occupied, something sharp and controlled in her expression. He hit you 4 times on the march. He is looking for another way. I noticed, Nathan said. She turned and looked at him. She was close enough that he could see the detail of her eyes, dark brown at the center deepening to black at the edges, and there was something raw in them that she was not entirely managing to keep out. You should not antagonize him, she said, and the frustration in it was not directed at Nathan. I did not antagonize him, Nathan said quietly. I told the truth. That is not the same thing. She looked at him for a moment and then looked away, and the muscle in her jaw worked once. No, she said, it is not. He bought her a cup of the hot mineral tea from the next stall over without asking, because she had been traveling since before dawn, and she took it without comment and drank it, and they stood side by side at his fish stall in the steam-hazed morning, and the contact of her shoulder against his was brief and incidental and entirely deliberate on her part, and they both noticed it and neither of them mentioned it. At the 5-week mark, Nathan's tally on the shale tile stood at 63 gold weights. It was not enough. It was never going to be enough. He had done the calculations 6 different ways and they all came out the same. Even with the best possible remaining weeks, he would reach perhaps 100 gold weights at the market by the time the 60-day deadline came. The merchant was not going to pay. Henley Das had been a coward about money when he had borrowed it, and cowards about money were consistent. Nathan sat in Gromma's quarters that evening with the fire between them and the tally tile in his hands, and he looked at the numbers and said, I need to think differently about this. She was quiet, watching him. What does the war chief need, Nathan said, besides the 344 gold weights? She frowned. What do you mean? I mean that gold is one form of payment. What else does the clan need? What does Drakul want that he cannot easily get? She was slow in answering, not because she did not know, but because she was thinking about whether this was a productive direction. The sleeping mother, she said finally, meaning the volcano. The northern pass through the volcanic terrain has been closed for 3 years. It used to be the fastest trade route between the valley and the northern coast settlements. If it could be reopened, the clan would have a direct route to the northern markets. The northern coast trades in smoked meats, preserved goods, northern timber. The valley has volcanic mineral salts and hot spring medicinals that the north pays well for. Why is the pass closed? The northern approach has 3 unstable sections. The vents shifted 2 years ago and changed the footing on the main path. No scout has been able to map a safe alternative route. She paused. I have tried twice. Nathan looked at her. What qualifications does a safe route mapper need? Experience with unstable terrain, she said. Ability to read the ground for subsurface heat and gas vents. Physical endurance. She stopped. Then, you are thinking about the sea, aren't you? Reading water. Reading ground is similar, Nathan said. Different medium, same principle. You are reading what is moving under a surface. The signs are different, but the logic is not. She was quiet for a long moment. If the route were mapped successfully, she said slowly, the value to the clan over the next year of trade would far exceed 300 gold weights. Then I need to speak with Drakhull, Nathan said. The meeting with the warchief was in the morning, and Gromma requested it and sat beside Nathan through it. And Nathan laid out the proposal with the clean directness of a man presenting a trade. If he mapped a viable route through the northern volcanic pass, the warchief would count that service as satisfaction of the ransom debt, and Nathan would be free to go. Drakhull was a man who had spent his life evaluating risks. He looked at Nathan for a long time, and then he looked at Gromma, and something passed between them that Nathan could not entirely read. "You will take him with you," Drakhull said to Gromma. "You know those ridges. If he dies on the attempt, the debt stands, and the Salt Road houses get a ghost." He almost smiled. "But if he opens the pass, the ransom is cleared." "That is agreeable," Gromma said, and her voice was steady, and Nathan was aware that she had not slept last night either, that she had been thinking about this. They left the next morning with 3 days of supplies and the scout's kit and Nathan's repaired nets coiled into a pack that he brought because he could not think without something in his hands to work. The volcanic terrain north of the valley was everything the stories had made it, pale and rust and black stone broken by steaming vents that hissed and spat, the ground sounding hollow underfoot in some places and solid in others, the footing requiring constant attention. Gromma moved through it with the trained precision of her previous attempts, and she told him where she had turned back and why, and he listened and looked at the ground. He went slowly, much more slowly than she expected. He crouched and pressed his palm to the stone, feeling for vibration, feeling for heat. He tracked the vent patterns the way he tracked the subcurrents underwater, the invisible motion of heat and gas finding its channels. He identified a section she had marked as impassable and showed her that the instability was localized to a 12-foot section that could be skirted to the west on what looked like bare rock but held firm because the mineral deposit underneath was dense enough to bear weight. "How do you know?" she asked, crouching beside him. "The color," he said, pointing. "The deeper mineral deposit oxidizes the surface differently, same as reading sand bars. You look for the color contrast." She looked where he was pointing, and he watched her see it, the slight change in tone at the surface of the stone, and watched the moment she believed him. "Show me how to read it," she said. So he taught her as they moved, and she absorbed it with the speed of someone whose entire life had been the study of difficult terrain, but who had been reading a different language of it. And she showed him the wind patterns around the vents, and how they predicted where the gas would concentrate, and where it would be safe to breathe. And it was the most alive Nathan had felt in years, working alongside someone at this level of focused competence and mutual trust. On the second night, they camped in a sheltered notch in the basalt ridge, a shallow cave with a rock overhang that kept the wind off, and they built a small fire from the dry scrub that grew in the protected hollows of the volcanic field, and they ate from the supplies, and the valley was invisible below them, and the stars were immense, and the whole world was this ridge and the fire and the two of them. Gromma was oiling her scout knives, methodical, and Nathan watched her hands work and thought about the first day of the march, and the way she had stepped between him and Vok without being asked, and then every time after that, and he thought about the evenings at the fire pit, and the morning at the market and the way she said his name, which she had started doing somewhere in the past 2 weeks without either of them noticing the transition from fisherman to Nathan. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You usually do not ask first," she said, not looking up from the knife. "This one is different," he said. She looked up. Her face in the firelight was extraordinary, all those strong planes made warm, the dark eyes steady. "Then ask it," she said. "What happens after the route is mapped and the ransom is cleared?" he said. "What happens to you? Do you stay in the valley? Do you keep scouting?" She was quiet for a moment. "I have always scouted," she said. "It is what I am." "That is not what I asked," he said. She looked at the fire. "I have not thought very far past the next patrol," she said. "That is how I have lived." "There is nothing wrong with it." "No," he said. "Nothing wrong with it." He looked at her. "I am going to be honest with you. I have been honest with you since the first day, and I see no reason to stop." Her eyes came back to him, steady and guarded, and something else underneath. "I do not want to go back to Tallow Cove the way I came," he said. "Alone, with nothing resolved, having survived the thing but not gained anything from it. I have been alone since my wife died, and I told myself I was fine with it because the sea is good company, but the last 6 weeks have been the least alone I have felt in 6 years. And that is your doing, Gromma. That is entirely your doing." The fire snapped, and a coal shifted, and the sound of the volcanic terrain settling in the night was distant and low, and she looked at him with an expression that was trying very hard to be a scout's expression and was not quite managing it. "You are a ransom package," she said, and the lightness in it was protective. "I am a fisherman who is halfway through mapping your northern pass and who is in considerable trouble about you," Nathan said, "and I think you know that. And I think you have been stepping between me and anything that might hurt me since the first day on the march, not just because it was practical, and I am telling you that I see that." She was very still. "Nathan," she said, "I am not asking you for anything right now," he said. "I am telling you the truth, that is all." She looked at him for a long moment, and then she looked back at her knife and ran the oiling cloth over the blade one more time with a focus that was not really about the knife. "Finish the root," she said. "Then we talk." He nodded, and the fire burned, and they sat in the companionable silence of two people who have said something important and are now living in the space of it. And it was the first night of his captivity, Nathan thought, that felt like something other than captivity. The route was completed on the third day. A viable path across the northern pass, marked with stone cairns at the 15 turn points and the 8 unstable zones where weighting needed to be distributed and pace needed to slow. It was navigable for a laden trade mule, Gromma judged. For a wagon with the right wheel width it was borderline but possible if the driver knew the marked sections. It was navigable for a person on foot without question. They descended back to the valley on the afternoon of the fourth day, with the marked route documented in Gromma's scout notation, a series of symbols on thin scraped hide that she had used throughout the expedition, and Nathan's additional notes on ground reading and vent behavior written in the plain margins in his own hand, and they presented it to Drakhull in the Warchief's hall that evening. The Warchief studied the route document for a long time. He called in his 2 senior scouts and had them study it. He sent one of them up to the beginning of the northern pass with instructions to walk the first 3 marked sections and return with a report, which the scout did in 2 hours and came back saying the route was exactly as documented and the cairns were clear. Drakhull looked at Nathan Prescott with the particular expression of a man who had made a practical bet and had it come in. "The ransom is cleared," he said. "The route alone is worth twice the debt. You are free to go." Nathan stood in the Warchief's hall and said, "I have a further proposal." Gromma, standing to his left, went very still. Drakhull raised an eyebrow, which was an impressive degree of restraint for a man whose eyebrows were as large as his. "Speak it." "I want to stay in the valley," Nathan said. "Provisionally. I want to run the fish market stall on a permanent licensed basis, and I want to be allowed to bring fishing equipment from the coast, my own nets and tools, which will increase the yield from the spring pools. In exchange, I will offer the Warchief 10% of my market earnings, and I will be available to consult on ground reading for any future route work that the scouts undertake." Drakhull looked at him. Then he looked at Gromma. Something in the look at Gromma was a question, and the way Gromma's expression remained entirely neutral was an answer. "Why would you stay?" Drakhull said. "Because," Nathan said carefully, "I have found something here worth staying for." The Warchief looked at his forward scout for another long moment, and then he looked back at Nathan, and if there was anything in his expression that resembled the satisfaction of a man who has been watching 2 very stubborn people circle each other for 6 weeks, he kept it admirably contained. 10%, he said, "and your license is renewable annually at my discretion, and you obey clan law while you are in my valley." "Agreed," Nathan said. He walked out of the warchief's hall into the warm, volcanic evening with his debt cleared and his freedom restored and a market license in his newly free hands, and Gromma walked beside him, and neither of them said anything for a full minute, walking down the market street in the low amber light of the valley's evening. "You did not ask me first," she said finally. "Ask you what?" he said. "Whether I wanted you to stay," she said. He stopped walking. She stopped beside him. He turned and looked at her. "Do you want me to stay?" he asked. She looked at him for a long moment, and her jaw was set and her eyes were very direct, and there was absolutely nothing small about her, nothing reduced or diminished by this moment. She was as entirely herself as she had been on the ridge the first day, but the expression was different now. It was open in a way that the ridges and the scout work and the patrol had not required her to be. "Yes," she said. "I want you to stay." He breathed out slowly. "Then I am staying." She looked at him, and then she looked at the ground between them, and then she looked back up and said, with the particular directness of a woman who has decided something, "I need you to understand that I do not do this simply. I have not." She stopped and started again. "I am not easy about this. I have kept things at a distance for a long time because distance is safe, and I am very good at distance." "I know," he said. "I have watched you choose distance 8 times in the past 2 weeks alone. I have not pushed." "I know you have not pushed," she said, and there was something rough in it, something almost undone. "That is," she stopped again. Then quietly, "that is not something I am used to." Nathan took one step toward her, just one, slow, entirely visible, giving her every chance to hold the distance if she needed to. She did not step back. He reached out and took her hand, the one hanging at her side, not her sword hand, her left hand, and he held it, her long-fingered, strong, scarred hand in his saw-tuft one, and he stood there and he said nothing at all. She looked at their hands, then she looked at his face. And then, with the focused deliberateness of someone crossing carefully chosen terrain, she lifted her free hand and put it against the side of his face, her palm against his jaw, her thumb at the corner of his cheekbone, and she looked at him with her dark eyes, and the whole valley steamed around them in the warm, volcanic evening. "Nathan Prescott," she said. "Fisherman. Wrong place, wrong time." "Yes," he said, and he was smiling. "I am glad you were on that dock," she said, and it was so plainly honest that it hit him like a wave hits a hull, solid and encompassing and completely undeniable. And then she leaned down. She had 2 inches on him and made no effort to minimize them. And she kissed him, careful and certain at once, and he kissed her back with the warmth of everything that had been building for 6 weeks, and it was the first unhurried thing either of them had done in a very long time. They stood there in the market street with the steam rising from the ground and the last of the amber light fading, and the sounds of the town around them. And nobody stared, or if they did, neither Nathan nor Gromma noticed, because the world had briefly contracted to this single point of contact and warmth and recognition. It was Gromma who stepped back first, not breaking the moment but settling it, taking it off the precipice and setting it somewhere stable. She kept his hand. That was new, she just held it. "The fish stall will need new netting," she said, in a voice that was not quite composed but was getting there. "I know," he said. "I have been patching the borrowed nets for 3 weeks." "I will see if the warchief can arrange transport from the coast for your equipment," she said. "He owes the favor." "You keep saying he owes you favors," Nathan said. "He owes me several," she said, and walked them both down the market street, and she held his hand the whole way to the fire pit at the scout station, and she let go only to build the fire, and he watched her do it and thought about the sea and about loneliness, and about how the best things had always found him when he had stopped looking for them. What happened next was not simple, but it was real, and real things are never simple. The merchant Henley Doss responded to the warchief's message on day 57 of the 60-day deadline, which was somewhat typical of men like Henley Doss, who had a talent for waiting until the last possible moment. The response was not payment. The response was an offer to negotiate, which Dracul brought to Gromma's attention because Gromma had been, informally and increasingly formally, the primary liaison between the warchief and the human elements of the valley's business. a role that had developed organically from her position as forward scout and her particular facility with humans that had, in the past 6 weeks, become something of a topic of conversation in Ashpool. The problem was that Henley Das was not offering to pay the debt. He was offering a counter-proposal. He had apparently heard through the Salt Road trade network that the Greystone clan had reopened the Northern Pass, and he was offering information he claimed would be of great value to the clan in exchange for the forgiveness of his debt and the release of any held assets, meaning Nathan, who was technically no longer a prisoner but whose debt clearance was contingent on the route work rather than a formal legal discharge. "He is trying to use your freedom as a bargaining piece," Gromma said, sitting across the fire pit from Nathan that evening with a fury she was keeping carefully banked. "Even though Dracul already told you the debt was cleared, it was never formalized in the clan record. The clerk did not file it. Dracul says it was an oversight." "Was it?" Nathan said. Gromma's jaw was tight. "I do not know. What information does Das claim to have?" "He says he has a map of 3 additional Northern Pass routes further inland that his trading house surveyed before the vents shifted. If those routes are usable, they would give the clan access to the full Northern trade network, not just the one coastal connection." She paused. "It is a meaningful offer." "So Dracul is tempted," Nathan said. "Dracul is a practical man," she said, and the edge in it was barely contained. Nathan sat with this. He was not afraid exactly. He was calibrating. Henley Das had found a lever, a small one, because Nathan's situation was technically still unresolved in the paperwork, and Das was betting that Dracul would rather have the inland routes than formally process the debt clearance. It was a reasonable bet. It was also a bet that treated Nathan as a commodity with no independent value, which was something Nathan had been resisting since the dock at Tallow Cove. "I need to speak with Das directly," Nathan said. "He is in Portgrave," she said. 4 days south." "Then I go to Portgrave," Nathan said. She looked at him. "You are not a diplomat." "No," he said. "I'm a fisherman who has been in this valley for 2 months and has mapped a route that the warchief values and has a market license and 63 gold weights in a locked box in this room. I am a man with standing here." He met her eyes. "I am not going as a prisoner. I am going as a free man to close a deal that should already be closed." Her expression was a complex thing. There was worry in it, and something fierce underneath the worry, and underneath both of those something that he had come to recognize as her version of pride, the particular expression she wore when he did something that surprised her pleasantly. "I am coming with you," she said. "I was not going to suggest otherwise," he said. They left 2 mornings later with Dracul's formal authorization, a written agreement in the clan seal that the route mapping had discharged the ransom debt, and a separate document stating Nathan's market license and status as a lawful resident of the valley, and with a small escort of 2 clan warriors who were emphatically not there to guard the prisoner but were there. As Gromma explained to Dracul in a brief and pointed conversation, Nathan was not supposed to hear, but did. To ensure that nobody in Portgrave got creative ideas about treating a resident of the Caldermere Valley as something available for collection. The road south from the valley was the one Nathan had been marched north on 2 months before, and walking it freely with Gromma at his side was a different experience in every possible way. She moved differently here than she did in the valley, a little more alert, reading the terrain for something other than fish pools and market stalls. She was the forward scout again, and it suited her, and Nathan watched her watch the world with the same feeling he had on the water when the wind was right and everything was moving exactly as it should. "You are looking at me," she said, without turning her head. "I am," he said, unrepentant. "You should be watching the road." "You are watching the road for both of us," he said. "That is what you do." She did turn her head then briefly, and the expression she turned on him was somewhere between exasperation and something much warmer, and then she looked back at the road, but the corner of her mouth was doing something. Portgrave was a trading town at a crossroads. not particularly large but loud with the noise of carts and draft animals, and the specific commercial energy of a place where several types of people come to make deals that benefit some of them. Henley Doss was staying at the better of the two inns, which Nathan had expected, because men like Henley Doss always chose the better of the two options when someone else was eventually going to pay for it. He was a small man, which Nathan had also expected without having any particular reason to. Short, compact, with quick eyes that evaluated Nathan's approximate worth in the first 4 seconds and came up with a number that was clearly less than the truth. He looked at Gromma the way many humans in this sort of town looked at orcs in this sort of town, with a carefully managed blankness that was trying to cover something less dignified, and Nathan watched the slight tightening around her jaw and felt something cold settle in his chest. "Prescott," Doss said, "the accidental prisoner. I understand I owe you some sort of apology." "You owe the Greystone clan 344 gold weights," Nathan said. "The apology is a separate matter. What I am here about is the documents." He put Dracul's authorization on the table between them. "These formalize the discharge of the ransom debt against me specifically, through the service I rendered. Your counteroffer to trade information for debt forgiveness is on a separate track and is between you and the war chief. I am asking you to acknowledge in writing that my debt clearance is complete and that you have no claim against my person or my status in the valley." Doss looked at the documents and then at Nathan and then, briefly and dismissively, at Gromma. "The war chief should come himself if he wants formal acknowledgement," Doss said. "The war chief sent his documents," Gromma said, and her voice in this small inn room was the same voice she had used on the march on day 1, the one that was a scout's field report and a warning and a statement of available consequences all at once. "I am Gromma Earthshaker, forward scout of the Greystone clan. I speak with the war chief's authority in this matter. The documents are valid." Doss looked at her. He was calculating. Nathan could see him calculating. And what he was calculating was whether there was a play to be made here that involved not signing anything and keeping his debt ambiguous so that he could use it in the larger negotiation. "Sign the acknowledgement," Nathan said, "and your counteroffer gets presented to the war chief on favorable terms. Do not sign it and your counteroffer arrives with a scout's report that describes your willingness to negotiate in bad faith." Doss looked at him with new eyes. "You are not what I pictured," he said. "Sign it," Nathan said. He signed it. They were back on the valley road 2 hours later, walking north in the afternoon light with the signed document in Gromma's pack and the escort 2 lengths behind them. Nathan was walking with a lighter step than he had since Tallow Cove dock, and he was not thinking about the debt or the document or Henley Doss. He was thinking about what came next. "Gromma," he said. "Yes," she said. "I want to formally ask the war chief to recognize me as a valley resident," he said. "Not just a licensed vendor, a permanent resident with a permanent standing." She was quiet for a step or two. "That is different from a market license," she said. "Permanent residency in the valley is a clan declaration. It requires a sponsor." "I know," he said. "Will you sponsor it?" She stopped walking. He stopped beside her. The escort, to their credit, found somewhere else to look. The road ran ahead of them into the beginning of the volcanic plain, where the first hint of sulfur came into the air and the pale stone began, and the late afternoon sky was doing something remarkable with the haze, turning everything gold and rose and volcanic gray, and it was an extraordinary backdrop for an ordinary man asking an extraordinary woman something that had been building between them for 2 months. "That is not a small commitment," she said. "I know," he said. "A sponsorship in clan law means I am accountable for you," she said. "It means your standing in the valley is connected to mine." "I know," he said. "I am asking because that is exactly what I want. I want to be connected to you in whatever form you will allow. I am asking because I mean to stay, and I mean to stay because of you, and I want there to be a formal thing in the world that reflects what I am telling you." She looked at him with her dark eyes in the gold light, and he watched her think through it, not quickly, not with the snap of a simple decision, but with the gravity of someone who takes things seriously and does not say yes when they mean no. "There is an orc custom," she said, finally slowly. "It is called a claimed standing. It is different from marriage. It is public. It is a declaration in the market square before the clan that two people have chosen each other and hold each other's standing. It is binding in clan law. It is, in human terms, it is closer to a marriage than to a sponsorship, but it carries its own meaning." Nathan looked at her. "Tell me the meaning." "It means," she said carefully, "that she has chosen him, specifically and publicly and irrevocably, and that he has chosen her. And that the clan witnesses it and the earth witnesses it because we are in the valley and the earth here is very much alive." She paused. "It is not taken lightly." "No," Nathan said. "I imagine it is not. It is also—" She stopped. There was color in her face, something rich and warm under the olive green, a flush that he had never seen before. In clan tradition, a scout who declares a claimed standing before she has been formally asked by the person she intends to declare it with is another pause. It is considered presumptuous. "Gromma," he said. "Yes. Is that what this is? You telling me about a custom that you have been thinking about applying to us?" She looked directly at him with the absolute front-forward honesty that was, he had learned, her deepest default. "Yes," she said. He breathed in the volcanic air and the gold light and the fact of her, this magnificent and serious woman who had stepped between him and every threat since the first day without ever asking anything in return, and he said, "Then ask me." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, in a voice that was low and entirely certain, "Nathan Prescott, I am asking you to stand with me in the market square of Ashpool and let me declare you mine, and declare yourself mine, before the Greystone clan and the sleeping mother, and let us be bound by it." "Yes," he said, without hesitation. "Absolutely yes." She breathed out, and the gold light caught the expression that crossed her face, relief and something enormous underneath it, and she stepped forward and took his face in both hands the way she had on the ridge. And she kissed him in the middle of the road with the escort behind them and the volcanic sky above them. And it was not careful this time. It was certain and warm and hungry, and he wrapped both arms around her and kissed her back with everything he had. The escort remained extremely focused on the road ahead. The claimed standing ceremony in Ashpool happened 4 days after their return, because Gromma had apparently already spoken to the clan's record keeper about the requirements, and the record keeper had the form ready in under an hour, which told Nathan something about how long she had been thinking about this. The ceremony was held in the market square at midday, which was traditional, in the full light and heat of the valley, with the steam rising from the springs and the basalt ridges framing the sky above the town. The whole market stopped. 300 orcs and 50 humans stood in the square or on the edges of it, or leaned out of the low stone buildings to watch, and Drakul stood at the front because a warchief's witnessed presence elevated the binding. Vok was somewhere in the back of the crowd, and Nathan was aware of him distantly in the way you are aware of a weather system that has moved off to the east. It had been a thing, and now it was not a relevant thing. Gromma Earthshaker stood in the center of the market square in her fitted scout leathers, black-haired and green-skinned, and absolutely magnificent, and she looked at Nathan Prescott across 10 feet of pale basalt stone with her dark eyes and her steady expression. And she said, in the formal words the record keeper had written out for her in the clan tradition, but that she had clearly spent the last 4 days internalizing until they were her own. "I, Gromma Earthshaker, forward scout of the Greystone clan, before the warchief and the clan and the sleeping mother, declare my chosen standing with Nathan Prescott. I take his standing as mine. I am accountable to him and for him. I choose him in the full sight of the earth and ask it to remember." Nathan, who had been given no prompting script because there was no traditional version for the human half of this, and had therefore written his own overnight with a nail on the back of a piece of thin hide, read from memory because he did not want to look at the hide when he said it. "I, Nathan Prescott, fisherman of Tallow Cove and resident of the Caldermere Valley, declare my chosen standing with Gromma Earthshaker. She stepped between me and harm before she knew me, and she has been standing beside me since, and I can think of no better place in the world to stand than beside her. I choose her in the full sight of whatever is listening, and I ask it to remember. There was a silence in the market square that had a particular quality to it, the silence of a large number of people choosing not to speak because the moment was occupying all available space. Then Dracul made a deep sound in his chest that was the formal witnessing acknowledgement, and the record keeper wrote the binding into the clan record, and the crowd let out a collective breath. Gromma crossed the 10 feet of basalt and took Nathan's hand and looked at him, and in her eyes was the same thing he had seen on the volcanic ridge at night, that open and somewhat bewildered expression, the expression of a woman who had been so long accustomed to distance that closeness still surprised her, but who was no longer retreating from it. "You wrote that overnight," she said quietly. "I did," he said. "It was good," she said. "Thank you," he said, and felt her squeeze his hand and squeezed back, and the market of Ashpool slowly returned to its noise around them. What followed was the celebration that Orc tradition required, which was loud and involved quantities of the valley's fermented grain drink, and the tavern opening its doors to the full square, and a fire built in the center of the market that burned high and gold into the evening. Nathan drank moderately and ate well and talked to half the town at one point or another, and Gromma stayed at his side with a comfort that was new in its ease, her hand occasionally finding his shoulder or his arm, a contact that was proprietary and warm and entirely deliberate. Late in the evening, when the celebration was still going but the fire had burned down to coals and the square had sorted itself into smaller knots of people, they walked to the scout station together and the door closed, and the fire pit was banked to a low warm glow, and all the things that had been patient and slow and carefully restrained for weeks finally had a room and a door and no need for restraint anymore. She touched him as though she had been planning it for the entire 2 months, which he suspected she had, her hands sure and warm, and entirely without the hesitation that had marked every earlier contact. He touched her with the careful attentiveness of a man who has been paying close attention and intends to continue doing so, and she made a sound against his hair that undid something tightly wound in his chest that he had not realized was still wound, and the fire pit glowed low, and the steam vented softly outside the narrow window, and the volcanic earth settled in its deep, slow way beneath them. And there was nothing cautious about any of it, and nothing careful, and everything was entirely right. In the morning, the valley was white with early mist from the springs, and Nathan woke to the sound of Gromma moving in the small room, already up, already in her scout leathers with the long knife at her right hip, and he watched her through the early light, and she turned and caught him watching, and the expression she wore was still the open one, still the one she had not closed off. "I am not going anywhere," she said, answering the question he had not asked. "I have a patrol at the East Ridge this morning. I will be back by midday. I have the morning market," he said, sitting up. "I will have fish at the stall." "I know," she said. "Save me one of the large ones." "I always do," he said. She came to the pallet and bent down and kissed him, brief and firm and unambiguous, and then she was out the door into the valley mist, moving with her scout's easy pace toward the East Ridge, and Nathan sat in the warm room with the fire pit cooling and thought about the fact that the worst luck of his life, being the wrong man on the wrong dock at the wrong hour, had turned out to be the best luck he had ever had. He got up and dressed and went to the fish pools. In the weeks that followed, the life they were building took on shape and texture. The Saltern's equipment arrived from Tallow Cove in a clan wagon that had gone to the coast on other business. Dracul had arranged it with characteristic practicality, noting that a better-equipped fish market increased his 10%, and Nathan unpacked his own nets and lines with the feeling of a man setting his hands on something he had made and knew the weight of. Old Dace, who had heard through the coast network that Nathan was alive and apparently in business in a volcanic Orc Valley, sent a letter that was mostly profanity and then concern and then profanity again. And Nathan wrote back and explained, concisely and accurately, what had happened, and at the end added that he intended to stay. Gromma read the letter over his shoulder without asking permission, which he had come to understand was her version of intimacy. "Your crewman uses unusual language," she observed. "He is a sailor," Nathan said. "It is a professional condition." "Will you send for him?" Nathan considered. "No," he said. "He is getting old for the fish work. He and Wickham can crew the Saltern without me and keep the Tallow Cove runs going. The boat earns more with a full crew than docked empty." He paused. "I will write them a share arrangement." She looked at him. "You are giving away your boat's earnings." "I am keeping them in honest work and giving myself a reason to visit the coast twice a year," he said. "That is not giving away anything. That is intelligent management." She made the almost laugh sound and went back to oiling her bow, and Nathan wrote the letter to Dace, and the scout station was warm and familiar around them. The formal document certifying Nathan's claimed standing and permanent valley residency was entered into the Greystone clan record on the 40th day after the ceremony, when the clerk finally caught up with the backlog. Gromma brought it home in her pack and handed it to Nathan without ceremony. He looked at it. His name was written in the clan's angular script alongside Gromma Earthshaker's, and the record-keeper's seal and Dracul's seal were both affixed, and it said, in the plain language of clan record-keeping, "The standing is witnessed, the claim is registered, let the earth remember." Nathan turned the document over in his hands, and then he looked at Gromma and said, "In human terms, what is this?" "In human terms," she said, with the slight tilt that was her version of humor, "it is a marriage record." "All right then," he said, and he folded it carefully and put it in the locked box beside his fish tally and his earnings, and then he looked at her and said, "Good." "Good," she repeated. "Good," he confirmed, and crossed the room and took her hands, both of them this time, and she looked down at him with her dark eyes and the expression she wore when she was entirely present and not maintaining any distance at all, and it was the best expression he had ever seen on any face. "I want to take you to the sea," he said. "When the clan can spare you for a patrol break. I want you to see Tallow Cove and the Saltern and the open water." She considered this seriously, as she considered everything. "I have never seen the sea," she said. "I know," he said. "It is very loud and much colder than the springs, and it smells of salt instead of sulfur. You will either love it or find it deeply unpleasant. Will you be there?" she said. "Obviously," he said. "Then I will love it," she said, and if the certainty of it sounded simple, it was only because she meant it without reservation, and she had learned in these weeks to say what she meant, because he had made that safe, and she had made safety possible for him in 100 forms he was still discovering. The ransom debt was finally, formally, fully resolved 4 months after Nathan had walked into the Caldermere Valley in ropes. Henley Das did pay, eventually, not to the war chief, but to a Salt Road arbitration that Dracul had initiated after the counteroffer fell apart when Das's inland route maps turned out to be incomplete and mostly wrong. The arbitrator's finding was that Das owed the original 344 gold weights plus administrative costs plus the arbitrator's fee, which came to 402 gold weights total, and the Salt Road houses collected it and handed the clan's portion across, and everybody went home poorer except Dracul. Das never came back to the valley or to the valley's territory, which was, everyone agreed, an entirely good outcome. The found money, the formal debt clearing, meant nothing to Nathan practically, because he had already cleared it with the route work. But Dracul chose to mark the occasion by formally upgrading Nathan's market license from annual to permanent, which was a distinction without much functional difference, but which was a gesture of the kind that a war chief makes when he has decided that a person belongs somewhere. Nathan accepted it with the directness Dracul seemed to prefer and said thank you without elaborating, and Gromma walked out of the warchief's hall at his side, with the particular straight-backed satisfaction of a scout who has closed a mission successfully. The last of the hard bargain came not from the clan or the debt or the merchant but from Vok, who had been quiet for months and then was not. It was a morning in the 5th month, the market open and busy and the fish stall doing its usual midday business, when Vok came to the stall with 5 warriors behind him, and this time it was not about the fish. This time he stood in the market square in front of a substantial audience of Ashpool residents and said, in the carrying voice of a man who had prepared his challenge, that the claim standing between Nathan Prescott and Gromma Earthshaker was improper because no human could hold a valid standing with a Greystone clan warrior, that the record was a disgrace to the clan's traditions, and that he was formally challenging the standing under the old clan right of the test of worth. The market went very quiet. Nathan set down the fish in his hands and looked at Vok, and then he looked at Gromma, who was standing 3 stalls away and had gone to a stillness that was the most controlled expression of fury he had ever seen in a human or an orc. A test of worth, Gromma explained, in the brief and very tightly managed exchange they were able to have before protocol required a response, was a traditional challenge to a declared standing. The challenged party, Nathan, as the non-clan member whose standing was being questioned, had the right to accept or refuse. Refusing meant the standing was dissolved and the record voided. Accepting meant a public trial of the challenger's choosing, witnessed by the warchief, and if the challenged party met the trial's conditions, the standing was affirmed and the challenge was closed permanently and could not be renewed. What kind of trial? Nathan asked in a very quiet voice. It depends on the challenger's choice, she said, her jaw tight. Vok can choose a physical combat, a feat of strength, a navigation trial, a hunting contest, or a judgment by the warchief's court. Which one is he going to choose? Nathan said. She looked at Vok across the market. Physical combat, she said. He will pick physical combat because he is twice your body weight and he knows it. Nathan thought about this for the span of 3 measured breaths. Vok had a spear haft and a mean streak and 60 pounds of orc muscle. Nathan had been hauling nets and rowing and climbing volcanic ridges for 5 months, and before that had been doing it on the open sea for 12 years, and his body was not a soldier's body, but it was not nothing. More importantly, he had spent 5 months in a volcanic valley reading terrain and adapting and figuring out what levers were available when the obvious ones were not. Drakhul is the witness, Nathan said. Yes. And the warchief's court is also an option. Yes, she said, and then she looked at him and something shifted in her expression. Nathan, I accept the challenge, Nathan said, loudly enough for the market to hear. He looked at Vok, but I invoke the challenged party's right of counter-selection. A murmur went through the market. The record keeper, who had appeared at the edge of the square with remarkable speed, confirmed that the challenged party did indeed have this right under the traditional code. If the challenged party accepted the trial but counter-selected the type, the challenger could accept the new type or withdraw the challenge entirely. I counter-select, Nathan said, the warchief's court judgment. Vok's face did something complicated. He had wanted the combat. The warchief's court was a different matter. It was a judgment of character, of standing, of contribution to the clan and the valley. It required Drakhul and 2 senior clan members to evaluate the challenged party's worth on all available evidence and render a finding. It was not a fight he could win with a spear haft. It was a fight of record. Nathan had 63 gold weights in fish market earnings and a permanent license, and an opened northern trade pass, and a valley route document, and a warchief who had been watching him for 5 months, and the entire record of his time in the valley to present. He had Gromma's sponsorship formalized in clan record. He had, he suspected, Drakhul's inclination if not his certainty. Vok could either accept the court and face those facts in public, or withdraw the challenge in front of the entire market and lose the standing he had been trying to take from someone else. The whole market waited. Vok looked at Nathan for a long moment with an expression that was many things and none of them particularly dignified. Then he looked at the market around him, 300 people in various states of witnessing, and at Dracul's hall at the north end of the square where the war chief had, by this point, come to stand in the doorway to watch. Vok withdrew the challenge. He said it clearly and in the formal language because Vok was, under everything, a clan warrior who knew when he was beaten in open ground, and then he and his 5 warriors walked away from the market and the market exhaled. Nathan turned back to his fish stall and picked up the fish he had set down. Gromma appeared at his shoulder and said nothing for a moment. Then she said, very quietly, "You knew he would not accept the court." "I thought he would not," Nathan said. "His whole case rested on the argument that I had no standing here, but the evidence says otherwise. He could not have made that argument look like anything except what it was in front of the war chief." She was quiet for another moment, and then she put her hand on the back of his neck briefly, warm and firm, and said, "Nathan." "Yes," he said. "I need you to know," she said, "that if it had gone to a physical trial I would have, I know," he said. "You know what?" she said. "You would have done something inadvisable on my behalf," he said. "Something that would have technically been inside the rules but would have been very uncomfortable for Vok." She removed her hand. "You are sometimes very irritating," she said. "I know that too," he said, and gave her the fish to hold while he arranged the stall, and she held it with the precise expression of someone who has been outwitted in a way they cannot quite object to. And the market went back to its noise, and the steam rose from the valley floor, and the sleeping mother breathed her long, slow, volcanic breath over everything, and the day was exactly as warm and ordinary and good as it was supposed to be. That evening they sat at the fire pit in the scout station with the door open to the valley air, and Nathan told Gromma about the first time he had been in a storm severe enough that he had thought he would not come home, which had been on a winter run 3 years after his wife died, and how the particular feeling of that storm, not fear but a cold, clear understanding that the outcome was uncertain, had changed the way he valued everything after. She listened, and when he was done she said, "After my second attempt on the northern pass, when I came back to the valley with nothing useful to report and the route still closed, I sat on the east ridge for 4 hours before coming back down. I told myself it was to rest, but it was to avoid admitting to Dracul that I had failed again." She paused. "I have not told anyone that before." "I know," he said. "How do you know?" she said. "Because you do not tell things you consider failures," he said. "You solve them or you carry them quietly, but you said it to me." She looked at the fire. "Yes," she said, "I did." He reached out and took her hand, and she let him, and they sat together in the warm volcanic evening, and the stars came up above the valley in their slow wheel, and the sleeping mother breathed her mineral breath over the stones, and 2 people who had been very alone in different ways sat next to each other and were, for the first time in a long time, neither of them that. When Gromma finally had a patrol break, 3 weeks into the 6th month of Nathan's life in the Caldermere Valley, they went to the sea. It was a 4-day journey south, the first 2 through the volcanic plain, and the last 2 through the more ordinary country of the foothills and the coastal approaches, and it was the first time since his capture that Nathan had been outside Orc territory in any meaningful way, and he found, to his own mild surprise, that it did not feel like leaving and returning to safety. It felt like showing someone something important. They came to Tallow Cove on the late afternoon of the 4th day, coming down the coastal road as the sun was getting low, and the sea was doing the thing it does in late afternoon when the light goes golden, and the water turns a shade of green gold that has no good name. Nathan stopped at the top of the last rise before the village and looked at it, the low buildings, the 2 moorings, the boats on the water, the smell of salt so strong it was practically solid, and felt the particular thing you feel when you have been away from a place you love and you come back and find it still there. Gromma stood beside him and looked at the sea. She was absolutely still for a full minute. Then she said, "It is very large." "Yes," he said. "It does not end," she said. "Not that you can see from here," he said. It ends eventually, very far away. She looked at it for another moment. The wind off the water hit them both and moved her hair, and she turned her face into it with a sudden involuntary openness, like a person meeting a new smell they were not prepared to find compelling. "It smells of salt," she said. "I told you it would," he said. "It smells of salt and something else," she said. "Something cold and enormous." "That is the sea," he said. "That is exactly what it smells of." She looked at him and then back at the water, and the expression on her face was the open one, the fully present one, and it was also the face of someone encountering something genuinely new. And he loved her in that moment with a specific and total clarity that was not like anything he had words for yet, but that settled into his chest like ballast, like the weight that keeps a boat stable, the kind of weight you are glad to carry. They went down to the village, and Dace came out of the Saltern's mooring shed with a face full of profanity and relief in equal measure, and Wickham stood behind him looking wide-eyed at Gromma in a way that Nathan noted was respectful rather than afraid, which said something good about the young man. Nathan introduced Gromma as his wife, because the clan standing was the honest equivalent, and Dace shook her hand with the matter-of-fact courage of a very old sailor who has encountered most things already, and decided not to be surprised by any of them. They stayed 2 nights. Nathan took Gromma out on the Saltern the second morning, the 3 of them, himself, Dace, and Gromma on the open water in the bright cold morning, and he showed her how to read the water the way she had taught him to read the volcanic stone. And she stood in the bow with the spray hitting her face and her hands on the rail, and she looked at the open water, and she was, Nathan thought, the most alive he had ever seen her, which was saying something because Gromma Earthshaker had a high baseline for alive. She did not get sick. He had worried she might. She did not. She stood in the bow for 2 hours while he and Dace ran the lines, and when they pulled the nets and the sea fish came over the side, she held one up and turned it over in her hands the way she had done with the springfish that first day at the market, and she looked at Nathan with a look that said, without words, "These are much better than the springfish." "I know," he said, answering the look. "We could bring sea fish to the valley," she said, "if we had a way to keep them cold on the road." He looked at her. "There is a salt packing technique," he said slowly. "My father used it for long-haul preservation. With the mineral salts from the valley, the flavor would be different, but—" "Different could be marketable," she said. "The valley has no salted sea fish at all. None of the traders bring it because the road is too long. With the northern pass open and the new trade routes," he said, "the northern coast settlements could route salt-packed fish through the pass to the valley," she said, "and valley mineral salts could go north in the same wagons." She paused. "That is a trading partnership between the northern coast settlements and the Greystone clan." He looked at her on the bow of his boat in the morning sea light and thought about the dock at Tallow Cove and the rope on his wrists, and the 4 days of marching in Vox Spear Haft, and the volcanic ridge at night and the fire pit and the market square and the way she had said his name the first time with the emphasis on the second syllable that had been, he now understood, a very small sign of something enormous beginning. "You are very good at this," he said. "At what?" she said. "At finding routes," he said. "Through whatever kind of terrain." She looked at him with her dark eyes in the sea light, and the wind moved her hair, and the Saltern rode the water with the comfortable sureness of a well-made thing in the element it was built for. And Gromma Earthshaker, forward scout of the Greystone clan, looked at this man she had chosen and who had chosen her and said, "I learned it from a fisherman." They sailed back to the mooring in the late morning, and Nathan helped Dace with the lines, and Gromma helped without being asked, taking the weight of the net coil with the ease of someone who understood the logic of a physical task, even if the specific task was new. And the 3 of them worked together in the easy rhythm of people who understand each other's competence. And it was, Nathan thought, exactly what a good life looked like. On the last evening before they returned north, Nathan and Gromma sat on the dock at Tallow Cove as the sun went down, and the sea turned all the colors the sea turns in the evening, and it was the same dock he had been standing on when the Orc patrol had come for him, which he pointed out, and which Gromma acknowledged with a solemnity that was also a version of the almost laugh. "If I had not been standing on this exact dock at that exact hour," he said, "you would not have come to the valley," she said. "And you would have escorted some other prisoner who would have been much less useful," he said. "Presumably," she said. "Do you think about it," he said, "how close it was, all of it?" She looked at the water for a moment. "Yes," she said. "I think about Dracul authorizing a substitute prisoner, which was a bad decision made for practical reasons, and how all of what followed came from that one decision. I think about the margins of things." She paused. "I also think that I have been a scout for 8 years, and the whole job is reading margins, figuring out the exact line between what is safe and what is not, and that I have never been as sure of a margin as I am of this one." Nathan looked at her. "Which margin?" he said. "This one," she said, and took his hand in hers on the dock, the same way she had on the volcanic road, and looked at the sea, and did not elaborate, because some things are complete without elaboration. They went back to the valley 5 days later, arriving as the sun was setting over the western ridge, and the steam from the springs was catching the last light, and making the whole basin glow with the particular warmth that Nathan had, without noticing it happen, come to think of as home. The market was closing for the day, and people called out to them as they came down the main street, and Gromma's hand was on his shoulder as they walked, easy and familiar. And the scout station was warm, and the fire pit needed building, and the locked box with the fish tally, and the clan standing document and 68 gold weights sat exactly where they had left it. And there was work in the morning, and the spring pools would need checking, and the Northern Pass trade wagons were due through in 2 weeks, and there was a letter from Dace to answer. Nathan built the fire, and Gromma unpacked the travel kit and laid the bow and the long knife where they lived in this room that was theirs, and the volcanic earth settled its deep slow settle beneath them, and the sleeping mother breathed, and the valley held its warm sulphurous breath, and 2 people who had been chosen by a hard chance on a dock in a coastal fishing town set about building an ordinary and remarkable life in the steam-light of the Caldermere Valley, where the earth was alive, and the trade was good, and everything that mattered was right here, in this room, in this valley, in this one hard-bargained and entirely real life that they had built together from the unlikely raw material of a ransom, a rope, a fisherman with no prospects, and a scout who kept stepping between him and harm until he could step back and stand beside her instead. The tally scratched on the shale tile said 68. Tomorrow it would say more. And the document in the locked box with both their names in the clan's angular script said, as clearly as any words ever said anything, "The standing is witnessed, the claim is registered, let the earth remember." The earth remembered.